Bienvenidos a la Universidad Nebrija. En breve comenzaremos. Rogamos vayan tomando asiento. Muchas gracias. Bienvenidos a la Universidad Nebrija. En breve comenzaremos. Rogamos vayan tomando asiento. Muchas gracias. Les agradecemos apaguen o silencien sus dispositivos móviles. Bienvenidos a la Universidad Nebrija. Nosotros lo resumimos en un lema: pasión por aprender y pasión por emprender. Les agradecemos apaguen o silencien sus dispositivos móviles. Comenzamos. Les rogamos, guarden silencio.
¿Ya empezamos? Sí. Okay, muy buenos días, bienvenidos al primer evento de este año en la Cátedra de Migraciones y Derechos Humanos de la Universidad de Nebrija. Mi nombre es Diego Acosta, soy el director de esta cátedra aquí en la Universidad de Nebrija y también soy catedrático en Derecho en la Universidad de Bristol en Reino Unido. En el día de hoy nos complace tener un gran panel con diferentes ponentes en el cual vamos a hablar de nómadas digitales, que es un tema absolutamente de moda, no solo en España, sino en muchísimos países del mundo. Es un evento que con el cual abrimos nuestro ciclo de actividades del año 2025-26, del año académico, y que organizamos conjuntamente con la compañía Global Citizen Solutions, cuya CEO y cuya directora de investigación hablarán en el segundo panel, y agradecemos mucho pues, la colaboración y esperemos que podamos organizar incluso más eventos en el futuro con vosotros. Para este primer panel voy a presentar de manera muy breve a los ponentes. En primer lugar tenemos a Santiago Antonio Yerga Cobos, que es el director general de Gestión Migratoria en el Ministerio de Inclusión, Seguridad Social y Migraciones, puesto que asumió en abril de este año. Desde abril de 2020 hasta diciembre de 2023 también fue director general de Migraciones, fue abogado en ejercicio hasta el año 2004, después estuvo vinculado con diferentes ONGs, ha sido también coordinador de políticas migratorias en la Junta de Andalucía entre 2004 y 2010, posteriormente director adjunto del Gabinete de la Secretaría de Estado de Inmigración y Emigración entre 2010 y 2011 y también ha trabajado como asesor en el Defensor del Pueblo de España. Y le agradecemos mucho a Santiago, que sabemos que tiene una agenda muy apretada. De hecho, nos conocimos la semana pasada en Colombia, en el Foro Mundial de Migraciones y Desarrollo. Así que te agradecemos mucho, Santiago, la presencia en el día de hoy en la Universidad de Nebrija. Después, bueno, el evento va a ser bilingüe, como es en todos nuestros eventos aquí, o en muchos de nuestros eventos aquí en Nebrija. En segundo lugar, va a hablar doctor Kaisu Koskela, que es una investigadora independiente afiliada al RUNOMI, que está en la Universidad de Radboud, en Nijmegen, con la cual también además tengo mucha afinidad y muchos colegas. Yo hice también hace muchos años una estancia de 3 meses en Nijmegen. Es antropóloga, se especializa en nomadismo digital y otras formas de trabajo remoto, de movilidad y trabajo remoto. Su investigación postdoctoral ha lidiado con la emergencia de los visados de nomadismo digital y los efectos en las estrategias que utilizan estas personas para moverse y navegar su estilo de vida a lo largo del mundo. Siempre ha sido una defensora de la independencia en la búsqueda de lugares para vivir, y ella misma ha trabajado y ha viajado durante los últimos 15 años como nómada digital. Y en tercer lugar tenemos a Alberto Horst Neihart, que es el jefe del think tank de European Migration European Policy Center, el jefe de la sección de Migración y Diversidad Europea, Senior Policy Analyst, también especialista en Derecho y Políticas Europeas de Inmigración y de Asilo. Ha trabajado en numerosos informes también sobre temas de derechos de ciudadanos europeos, políticas de migración, narrativas sobre migración, y es uno de los think tanks punteros en Bruselas. También estamos muy contentos de tener a Alberto aquí y de volverte a ver después de la última vez que nos vimos hace un par de años en Chile. Voy a dar la palabra a los ponentes, van a hablar 10-15 minutos cada uno, después tendremos un pequeño espacio para preguntas y pasaremos después al segundo panel. Muchas gracias y te cedo la palabra, Santiago.
Gracias, Diego, por tus palabras, y gracias también a la Universidad de Nebrija por habernos invitado a la Dirección General de Gestión Migratoria a poder participar en este evento. Yo, por evidentes razones, nada más que me voy a centrar en hablar de nómadas digitales de origen extranjero, ¿no?, que son los que cuya gestión se lleva a cabo desde la Dirección General de la que soy titular. Si han tenido ustedes un mínimo acercamiento a la normativa española en materia de nómadas digitales, de trabajador de carácter internacional. ¿Hay algún problema? Sí. No traigo diapositiva. Como decía, en España se utiliza la expresión teletrabajador de carácter internacional. Tiene un interés hacer una mínima reflexión sobre esa expresión frente al romanticismo de la figura o de la expresión nómada, ¿no?, que está todo vinculado a una persona que está en constante movimiento, ¿no?, y que, bueno, que tiene mucho reflejo en la literatura. En España se pone el acento en el carácter de trabajador, ¿no?, de la persona que quiere residir en esas condiciones en España. Yo creo que es bastante interesante tener presente esta reflexión en todo momento, por lo que voy a decir a continuación. También quiero agradecer, no quiero que se me olvide, agradecer a Global Citizen Solutions, que en su índice global de nómadas digitales sitúa a España en primer lugar con una puntuación de 89.12 como el país más atractivo para teletrabajar a distancia. Es cierto que las condiciones españolas de vida, de clima, etcétera, etcétera, son seductoras, pero también es cierto que a ello contribuye un sistema de documentación ágil y, sobre todo, flexible. En general, la Ley 14/2013, que es donde se regula la figura del teletrabajador de carácter internacional o nómada digital, regula un régimen migratorio de carácter especial por razones de interés económico, con el objetivo de facilitar la atracción y retención del talento en España. Este régimen se caracteriza por una serie de cuestiones que me interesa resaltar. Por una parte, no se le aplica la situación nacional de empleo en ninguna de las figuras que prevé. En segundo lugar, permite la reagrupación inmediata de los familiares, a diferencia de lo que ocurre en el régimen general de extranjería, en la que, como ustedes saben, los trabajadores o trabajadoras tienen que esperar un año para poder reagrupar a sus familiares. En tercer lugar, la agilidad en los procedimientos, porque son 20 días para la resolución de las autorizaciones con silencio positivo y 10 días en la tramitación de los visados. En cuarto lugar, se trata de permisos únicos que habilitan a los titulares, incluidos los familiares, a residir y trabajar en todo el territorio nacional. En quinto lugar, son tramitados por la misma unidad, la Unidad de Grandes Empresas y Colectivos Estratégicos, conocido por su acrónimo UGE. Y en sexto lugar, por la vigencia de las autorizaciones, que tienen un carácter bastante más amplio que el de las propias autorizaciones en régimen general. Y, por último, interesa destacar también sus renovaciones, de tal modo que a los 5 años se puede acceder a la residencia de larga duración, que establece un régimen equiparable, no idéntico, pero sí equiparable al de los ciudadanos españoles. Mediante la Ley 28/2022, conocida como la Ley de Startups, se realizaron 2 modificaciones que afectan a trabajadores autónomos extranjeros, sobresaliendo especialmente la figura del teletrabajador de carácter internacional. La otra modificación iba destinada a emprendedores, pero no me voy a detener en ella. En el caso de nómadas digitales se crearon visados y autorizaciones que permiten la obtención de permisos de residencia y trabajo para nacionales de terceros países que ejercen una actividad laboral o profesional a distancia para empresas radicadas fuera del territorio nacional mediante el uso exclusivo de medios y sistemas informáticos, telemáticos y de comunicación. Los requisitos para acceder a este sistema, en el caso de que el teletrabajador sea por cuenta propia, se permite trabajar para empresas radicadas en España hasta un máximo del 20%. Al resto no se le permite. Es decir, un teletrabajador no podría trabajar para una empresa que desarrolle su actividad en España a tiempo completo. El teletrabajador debe acreditar ser graduado o posgraduado de universidades de reconocido prestigio, formación profesional y escuela de negocio o contar con una experiencia profesional mínima de 3 años. La empresa para quien trabaja el nómada digital debe haber tenido una actividad real y continuada durante el último año y el teletrabajador una relación de 3 meses con esta misma empresa. Existen 2 modalidades de acceso al permiso de nómadas digitales. Por una parte, el visado, que se obtiene en las oficinas consulares españolas o misiones diplomáticas, que tiene una duración de 1 año, y por otra parte, la autorización de teletrabajo de carácter internacional. Se solicita en el caso de que el extranjero se encuentre ya en España, como ya he dicho antes, ante la Unidad de Grandes Empresas y Colectivos Estratégicos y tiene una duración de 3. Yo no voy a contar aquí las excelencias del teletrabajador internacional, sobre la que supongo que se va a disertar hoy a lo largo de esta conferencia. Pero yo sí quiero insistir en 3 ideas claves que desde el Gobierno de España se tienen presente a la hora de abordar esta figura. Por una parte, la posibilidad de que contribuya a revitalizar zonas rurales y económicamente deprimidas, lo que en España se conoce como la España vaciada. De hecho, quiero destacar que en España existe la Red Nacional de Pueblos Acogedores para el Teletrabajo, con 77 pueblos que se encuentran adheridos a esta red. No podemos olvidar tampoco que esta figura se ha regulado en una normativa económica, cuyo objetivo es fomentar el ecosistema de empresas emergentes. Por eso vuelvo a insistir a la reflexión que hacía al principio de la no utilización de la denominación nómada digital, sino de la de teletrabajador. Y una idea que me parece que es bastante importante a destacar es que no se compite con las vacantes nacionales de nivel equivalente en España por las razones que he dicho antes al referirme a los requisitos. No puede haber esa concurrencia. ¿Cuáles son los principales problemas con los que nos encontramos a la hora de la tramitación de estas autorizaciones? Voy a destacar 3. Por una parte, los problemas de acreditación de las relaciones laborales previas. eso constituye una dificultad que en muchas ocasiones determina la no concesión de la autorización. En segundo lugar, problemas de cobertura con la seguridad social, ¿no? Que también en muchas ocasiones determina la no concesión de esa autorización. Y en algún caso, y no diría que exclusivamente anecdótico, también problemas con antecedentes penales preexistentes en el país de origen del propio teletrabajador. Dicho esto, y teniendo en cuenta que desde la unidad de grandes empresas, que pertenece a la Dirección General de la que soy titular, bueno, pues creo que merece la pena que demos algunos datos, ¿no?, acerca de las autorizaciones. Entre 2024 y hasta lo que llevamos, vamos, hasta el día de ayer de 2025, se han concedido algo más de 32.000 solicitudes. Cuando digo que se han concedido, es que tienen carácter positivo, vamos, ¿no? O sea, que se han concedido. Curiosamente, el 47,64%, es decir, casi el 50%, son de familiares, ¿vale? O sea, que de estas 32.000, algo más de 16.000 son de auténticos titulares como teletrabajador. Para que se hagan una idea, el ritmo de solicitudes semanales que tramita la unidad de grandes empresas está en torno a 2.000 solicitudes por semana, lo que refleja una importante intensidad, pero al mismo tiempo también una importante carga de trabajo para la propia unidad de grandes empresas. Por nacionalidades destacan Estados Unidos, Reino Unido, Brasil, Colombia, aunque están representadas todas las nacionalidades del mundo, absolutamente todas, incluso alguna que no está ni reconocida, pero también forma parte. Yo creo que todos estos datos corroboran lo que ya indica el índice de Global Citizens Solutions. España es un país no solo atractivo, sino un referente en materia de nómadas digitales. Pero para ir terminando, pero en el ámbito migratorio, España también muestra sus credenciales en positivo como país de referencia en otros espacios. En mayo del presente año entró en vigor el nuevo reglamento de extranjería que establece nuevas fórmulas flexibles de acceso a España y de normalización documental de personas migrantes. Y asimismo continúa ampliando programas de migración circular con países de América Latina y de África. A nuestro juicio, todo ello conforma un panorama en el que la apuesta de España por una gestión ordenada, regular y segura de la inmigración es evidente, cumpliendo así los objetivos del Plan Mundial sobre Inmigración de Naciones Unidas. Muchas gracias y si luego hay alguna pregunta, pues con gusto intentaré contestarla. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Santiago, también por haber sido tan preciso con el tiempo. Kaisu, yeah, the floor is yours, and tiene diapositivas, Kaisu, yeah.
Do we have a...
Yeah, the point está ahí, ¿no? Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You need the microphone, sorry, Kaisu.
Yeah, I'm just seeing if I can get these slides up first. What do you think?
Yeah, there you go.
All right, here we go.
Okay. Hello, my name is Kaisa Koskela. Thank you for the introduction. That was very thorough. 15 years as a digital nomad. I'm actually up to about 20 by now, which should be a reminder to everyone here that this is not a new phenomenon. Digital nomadism has been around for much longer time than the media has been talking about it. And today, for my part, I would like to discuss the definitional matters a little bit of what we're talking about. And this was a very good introduction to my talk too, what you were talking about, because I have actually studied the Spanish digital nomad visa at length, and it's a very particular type. And as you are saying, it is for teleworkers of international character, which is a different thing than a digital nomad, as we will see. My research has focused largely on digital nomad visas and the reception of them by digital nomads themselves, but also by other types of remote workers, which is maybe even more important, I would say. just shortly to say that there's currently more than 60 visas around the world that are something like a digital nomad visa. This is an umbrella term used by many countries, quite confusingly, but also used by media because it's being pushed up on us. But the point about that is that it's about 1/3 of the world's nations now. And the first one only came out in 2020. So I think that's a very rapid, fast, new policy type that's been evolving. And people at first thought this is not of importance to a lot of countries, but I think time is telling us differently. It's becoming quite central in this world to take account of the fact that there are remote workers who are globally moving around. In my research, I've been looking at different types of digital nomad visas from 2 different perspectives, from the temporality of how long they are. The shortest ones currently are 90 days. The longest ones are, as the Spanish one, 5 years technically, but actually eternity, potentially, because you can qualify for permanent residency and even citizenship through the visa. So there's a huge scale in that one, and also on if you can renew them and stuff. And the other scale that we're looking at is the civic attachment, is how deeply does it integrate the visa holder into the country and its systems? Do you become part of the taxation, part of the social security? A lot of important and very difficult issues for a lot of countries. And we've been recognizing different rationales that countries have for having these visas. The 2 most important ones are tourism and immigration. And in this picture, you can see this is by far not all the visas, but quite a few of them. Majority of the visas are still on the tourism rationale. They're identifying digital nomads as a short-term visitor who come and go, and they could maybe supplement the normal tourism trade, normal tourism numbers. And there's very few that are right at the other end. I have Spain and Portugal here on the immigration rationale. There's few countries who have taken that approach of giving a residency permit rather than a short-term visa to these people. So most of these countries are kind of looking at the tourism dollar rather than longer-term human capital gain, whereas in fact the most popular, the numbers were very nice to hear because I have not seen them before. That's amazing. The most popular by far have been the Spain and the Portuguese one. And currently also the Thai one, which is here in another corner, which is a corner of capital gain policy logistics, which would probably not be as a policy recommended to a lot of countries, but it works for Thailand. But it's basically a visa that gives you 0 integration chances or future in the country, but it's a very long visa, at least 10 years as it stands now, potentially longer. This is the first finding of my research. Digital nomads do not actually use the digital nomad visas. Now, we don't have to go too deeply into these reasons, but the applications don't, of course, work for everyone. Some of them ask for 7,000 euro monthly income, for example, which is, even though we imagine a lot of digital nomads to have a very lucrative jobs, that's not the truth for majority of them. So there's a lot of things about the income and the financial aspect and the proof that they have to provide that doesn't work. The paperwork load is also very heavy. We mentioned the one that employers have to secure social security, for example. This is very difficult between countries. Currently, it's not always working out. But the main reason, I would say, is actually the fact that the digital nomad visas are not compatible with digital nomad mobility. Most of them are 1 or 2 years, whereas actual true nomads, and we'll get to this, move every 1 or 2 months. They also, all these visas require you to have a long-term accommodation for the time of the visa, whereas these people actually want to be mobile and keep moving, even if it's within that country, but they tied down with this accommodation requirement. There's minimum stay in country stay requirements that do not work for a lot of people. You have to stay, at least in Spain, for example, you have to be here 10 months of the year if you want to continue with the visa. And one thing that I think a lot of countries haven't thought about that nomads always complain about is that you have to go to your home country embassy to apply for it. These are people who are actually continuously on the road and have not maybe visited their home country in years, and certainly don't want to go to that country, have to get an Airbnb there again, and wait for months on end a lot of the time to actually get this visa. So it's not really suitable for them. So majority of them, by far, I would say way more than 90% of actual digital nomads still travel on tourist visas and tourist permits and cross borders, very unnoticed to us as researchers, which is frustrating for sure. But also they end up in a very gray zone because countries' tourism permits technically do not allow you to work. And there's different definitions of this. I'm sure our legal scholars will say, does this mean work remotely or work in that country? But it's nonetheless a very gray zone. Which brings me to the terminology. So I'm talking about 3 different types of transnational remote working mobility types. Digital nomadism only being one of them. On the length of stay scale, we have a shorter term workationers, which is maybe the fastest growing way of combining work and travel. These are people who occasionally leave their home, go to another place and work from there for a few weeks or a few months at a time. And this is a form of tourism, very clearly. And as I said, this is very fast growing, very popular in Europe as intra-EU movement, for sure. And then right at the other end, we have these remote working residents. This is a group that is being made possible because of the digital nomad visa, such as the Spanish one. This wasn't a possibility before when there wasn't visas that you could actually take your existing work and move to another country. But essentially, when it comes to these residence permits, we are talking migration. These are migrants, these people. They move from A to B, they relocate. They don't call themselves migrants. No one really refers to them as such. But in a way, this is a new form of skilled migration. That's my perspective too, at least. It's a skilled labor migration where work is separated from the geographical location, which is a current reality in the world. In between, we have the true digital nomads. Research says that most of them stay between a few weeks, few months in a location and then continuously move from A to B to C to D to wherever. A lot of the time in a circular motion, they return back to their places that they like, but the movement is continuous and it doesn't have necessarily that kind of home base. There's no return back to home base in between. I, in my research, use 6 months as the cutoff point because after that, at least technically, they should be applying for residency, regardless of what country they are. This doesn't always happen, but technically, after that, you would be living in that country, right? If you're a resident in a country, you can't be a nomad there. It's in the word. The nomadic part, I think, is very important here. And I personally teeter between, does this matter? We all know what we mean when we say digital nomad visas. But it does actually matter to policymakers, also on the supplier side, anyone selling anything in this market, but also employers. Employers who have employees who want to go and work remotely from abroad, the difference between allowing them to go on a workation from an HR point of view is very different to having them be full-time digital nomads, which in the current system in the world is practically impossible as an employee. And I can tell from personal experience, the amount of paperwork, if you're actually trying to completely stay out of the gray zone, it's baffling. But the remote working residents, as I said, that is a possibility nowadays in this world with these visas. And there's also a possibility that's been opened up to employers to allow their workforce to move to another country because the gray area has been removed. But in my research, digital nomadism, I talk about it as a lifestyle mobility. It's not tourism, it's not migration, it's not something in between. It's a separate phenomenon itself, and it should be approached as such. Not to confuse everyone, but this can also be thought of in this kind of funnel way, which is also to do with how long do these people stay in the country, from short, medium to long stays. And this is, the importance of this is the fact that the longer a remote working individual stays in the country, the benefits for the country are different. So if we look at the economic impact, of course, all of them bring in a foreign earned income, which is great for any country, and the longer they stay, the more there is. But if you stay longer, you also start to increasingly, we see that the behavior of, there was a very good study come out of Barcelona just literally last week of how the nomads living in the city and the remote working residents, how they're spending their money. And the money was actually going way more the similar way to local residents rather than to tourists. So the money is being spread around in a very different way. So it's not just a longer term tourism form. It can be used in infrastructural, new industry development, like co-working spaces, even internet improvements in locations where you have higher density of remote workers coming in. And eventually, tax revenue. I think a lot of countries have been very shy on introducing a tax element to their digital nomad visa. But if you think of them as your new migrants, of course, there should be a taxation element as well. But the more important part, maybe, that a lot of countries are missing out on is this, the human capital impact. I'm being a bit generous with this arrow, saying it starts from the workationers. It doesn't really. Not even maybe digital nomads. I think we get into the slow mad stage, which is people staying about 6 months before you start seeing human capital impact. These are things like, internationalization of the society, innovation, knowledge transfer, collaboration, startup scenes we have seen really being boosted by remote workers. And then we get into the point which is what I'm making, that you can gain highly skilled migrants. But these have to be allowed by the policy. Again, using Spain as an example, there's a 20% allowance of your income can come from the local economy as well, which is great, because most of these countries completely block you from any kind of involvement in the local labor market. Out of a protectionist view, I understand it, but if you're not allowed to even hire a local person to work with you, you cannot offer your services to a local person, you are very separated and you're missing out on a lot of opportunities of collaborations and bringing opportunities to your local talents and retaining youth, for example. I've been in Tirana quite a few times in similar policy discussions, and they have noticed that digital nomadism is booming in the city, and this is making local younger people stay there because they are getting opportunities now through these people coming from somewhere. They're getting a complete different internationalization element that they never had before. I won't go into this. This is my last slide. It's just to say, for those so inclined, I have a policy paper where, because of the funnel thinking, we actually recommend that each country should have 3 different remote work policies. The simplest one being the first one for the workationers. If you actually just want to attract these people to maybe supplement your tourism out of season and also in more remote locations, UK and New Zealand just earlier this year came out with a version like this, which is just to change the wording of your tourism permit to say that you also allowed remote work while you're in the country as a tourist. And they're calling them, New Zealand had a big launch of the new digital nomad visa, and this is exactly what it was. It was a change of terminology. And this is actually very important from removing that gray zone, even for insurance purposes, certainly for your employer, certainly for the individual, and such a simple step to actually attract and say, we are a nomad welcoming country, which is a lot of places are doing. And then we're saying if you want to commit them longer in the funnel thinking, have a digital nomad visa, which is a specific type of visa as well. And then after that, have the residence permit that you can retain this talent and make them skilled migrants in your country. Our recommendation is also to eventually allow citizenship and at least permanent residency, if not citizenship, because why let go of very highly skilled people bringing in foreign income and influences if they've already proved to be a good resident in your country for 5 or 10 years. That is it for me. These are my references, because as an academic, I must put them there. There you go. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Kaisu. That was extremely interesting. Alberto?
Yeah. Yes, good morning, everyone. Is it Steve? still? No. Good afternoon, everyone, then. Thanks for the invitation also from my end. I want to start off with a disclaimer, which is at the European Policy Center for which I work. We haven't really looked at the discussion on digital nomadism. And this is for a number of reasons, but mainly because the attention of EU policymakers is certainly not on this topic, but it's much more on containment strategies or implementation of the recently adopted reforms that focus very much on irregular migration. That being said, I immediately thought that the invitation and the topic raised a number of interesting questions also from a EU policymaking perspective. And so I'll try to reflect a little bit today on, first of all, whether there are cogent reasons for a stronger involvement of the European Union in this matter. And then I also wanted to raise a couple of concrete but rather hypothetical questions, given the number of national initiatives that promote digital nomadism through visas. I will consider whether it would make sense to have an EU-wide digital nomad policy, and also connected to these, whether there are complementary initiatives that could be taken in order to facilitate or address some of the problems that have already been mentioned in the previous two contributions. Now, let me start off with three initial observations, and these stem from having deep dived in a very complex matter, both from a policy but also from a regulatory perspective for just a couple of weeks. The first one is that it seems to me that at academic level, the focus of the attention is very much on the sociological aspects, so on questions around lifestyles, on identities, in part also on definitions. And this is important work, but oftentimes the policy elements are more on the margin of the discussion, and I think this does not do us a lot of good, particularly because the policy implications are very wide and they concern all European countries and beyond. And so we heard some of the benefits before, from attracting talents, stimulating innovation, promoting rural development, mobilizing inactive workers. These are concerns across all member states of the European Union, not just for Spain, evidently. But the risks are also common, and the challenges perhaps must be addressed from a European perspective too. And so if you think of social security and social security coordination, this is something where the Union has competences, and there could be also an involvement or an enhanced effort to better coordinate on social protections. But similarly, other challenges too, I think, can be thought of from a European perspective. Just look at discussions on pressure on housing and social services. These are issues that are debated across European countries. And also, I found it quite interesting reading a few recent contributions that we oftentimes overlooked, that the way in which authorities deal with these matters have implication for the overall debate on migration, because evidently a lot of backlash against immigration stems from local grievances around questions such as housing and lack of housing. And so I think that we need to focus very much on policies. Second observation is that where policy analysis exists has much more of a global perspective rather than European perspective. Third observation is that it seems to me that there are quite strong assumptions in the debate that somehow limit the purview, limit the scope of the analysis, both at academic level or also at the policy level. I will go back to that in a second, but for instance, I found it interesting, Kaisho, that you mentioned several times intra-EU mobility. EU citizens and the fact that they may also be digital nomads, it is oftentimes on the margin of the debate because the focus is so much on attracting talents from third countries. And that, I think, raises interesting questions. But let me start, then move on, to questions around the national initiatives, because I do want to raise the question of whether there is space for also stronger involvement on this matter. And I heard with interest the previous two presentations, and I think it's clear that there are some commonalities between the digital nomad visas promoted by different member states. However, what also strikes me is how diverse they are, both in terms of the conditions that they set, so the eligibility conditions to access them, but also the rights that are attached to the visas. And so family reunification is not a standard for many countries. Also the possibility to extend, and for how long to extend. There is significant diversity as well as on having local clients or not, because there is diversity there as well. And I think this is quite important when thinking about the space for initiatives, because this diversity evidently could pose some problems further down the line. Another thing that I noticed, and perhaps this is something that you've also examined in your studies, is that it seems to me that the goals of the policymakers at the national level may not always be the same, because even in Europe, there may be cases where this is more about boosting local economies or promoting tourism, and there may be cases where this is much more about retention and filling gaps in skills and in the labor market. And this diversity also is something that we shouldn't lose sight of, and it's a bit more on the margin of the debate. Let me move on now to the gaps that I mentioned, because indeed the focus of the attention is on these national initiatives, and I think there are gaps at scientific level, but also in terms of the data that we have to analyze this phenomenon. And so I did immediately think, wait a second, but even if the attention is so much on third country nationals, isn't there an intra-European mobility perspective on all of this? And so certainly I am missing at the moment questions around how European citizens currently take advantage of free movement rules in order to work as digital nomads in other countries. I don't think we have currently any data on this. I don't think there is a lot of scientific research on this. And I think it raises very interesting questions from a policymaking perspective, not least because free movement is very much saturated at the moment, and there are very few opportunities for European institutions to promote this. But also because there are many countries that are trying to call back their citizens, because they also want to use intra-EU mobility to get their talents back. And I wonder whether there are any European countries that are perhaps also going to utilize free movement rules in order to get back their citizens, or give them the flexibility they need in order to take advantage of their residence in the community of origin while continuing to work for other companies. Then there is also an intra-EU mobility level for third country nationals, which is not very much in the debate. And so, for instance, if Spain issues long-term residence, and I believe you tend to use the EU directive to do so more than national permits, this gives intra-EU mobility rights to long-term residents. And so this is also not in the debate at the moment, and there's not a lot of research. So there is not a lot of attention on the many gray areas around posted workers. I do wonder whether there are posted workers that also on the side act as digital nomads. There are lots of missing parts, missing elements to the debate that come from this overwhelming attention on third country nationals, and particularly on national visas. The last point, before moving on, is on those who come and indeed overstay their tourist visas or work against the conditions for the tourist visa. This is also obviously a EU relevant matter, given that these are Schengen visas. And it's interesting that all the literature that I came across indicates that this is a phenomenon, but it is not discussed at European level at all. And I wonder whether this is deliberate or because of other reasons. Now, let me move on because I do want to finish more or less on time. Going back to the question of whether there is the potential for the EU to then become more involved on this matter for the reasons that I just pointed to. And the question around whether it would make sense to have a EU-wide digital nomad visas is purely hypothetical. It's not in the agenda. And also, I'm not going to discuss with you the technical matters because there are questions around competences. But I think exercising or thinking about this is interesting, because it's obvious that there is a need and there could be arguments in favor, partly related to the experience of digital nomads themselves that you eloquently presented before. And so at the moment we have a very patchworky situation in Europe, and this could help to address this issue. There's a lot of uncertainty that digital nomads face. And so from this perspective too, it could be of help. I do see a risk of a race to the bottom in the long term by member states and a risk of competition between member states rather than coordination on this matter. Not least, there's also an issue of enforcement of labor rights that evidently is more on the margins of the debate without strong EU actions. But there are also reasons against it. And before concluding, I want to mention a few of these too. Because from my perspective, also in the light of what was presented before, digital nomads may aim at having a relatively simple access, and let's say that EU legislation is not always the most straightforward. And so maybe this is not what digital nomads actually want. And this is a question of agency, which I also didn't find. There are obvious reasons why it is difficult to understand what is it that actually this group of people want, but it is an important question too. The second point is about the entry channels to the EU. I do agree that this will likely over time become more of a discussion framed in terms of labor migration. There are studies, a recent one, that showed that there are over 300 ways for third country nationals to come to the EU to work. This could likely just come on top of all of these, and so instead of creating simpler access, it could lead to even greater uncertainty. And so to conclude, from my perspective, it wouldn't make sense to necessarily think of EU involvement from this perspective, from the perspective of the visas, where there are lots of interesting initiatives at the national level that could be tested and could be, and some of the questions that I raised could be answered by looking at them, but rather to focus on those policy questions which are very important and could facilitate digital nomadism, going back to social security coordination being one, tax and tax regimes another one, working conditions another one, etc., etc. And on all of these matters too, the EU could be more involved. Later on, if there is space, I'm happy to just give you some tips. If you're interested in doing a little bit of lobby, there might be some opportunities coming up in the calendar for you to push for some of these changes, but for now, I will leave it to this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alberto. So we have, well, this is extremely interesting. We have 10 minutes, 10 minutes for questions. Obviously, this is raising a lot of issues because it's not only that in Spain, digital nomads might become long-term residents. All the Latin Americans become EU citizens after 2 years, right? Or they can apply for Spanish citizenship after 2 years. And it would be interesting actually to know how many of the thousands of new Spaniards each year have entered through this residence permit, right? Any questions from the audience? Please, one question there. If you can be very brief, because we only have 10 minutes, because Santiago has another event. If you can introduce yourself very briefly and just pose the question to whoever. Yeah.
Sí, para el señor Santiago Yerga. En jornadas y congresos anteriores nos han trasladado la intención de la Dirección General de Migraciones de profundizar, ¿no?, en la fiscalización del cumplimiento de los requisitos del teletrabajador de carácter internacional de cara a unas renovaciones. Pienso que para el próximo año ya se estarán cumpliendo las primeras renovaciones previstas, ¿no? ¿Cuál sería el criterio de la Dirección General de Migraciones respecto a aquellos teletrabajadores de carácter internacional que por causas ajenas a su voluntad no lograron darse de alta en la Seguridad Social, bien porque no consiguieron a tiempo una cita en comisaría para la obtención de la tarjeta de residencia o por algún criterio que hayan, bueno, encontrado como tropiezo en la Seguridad Social para poder darse de alta? ¿Cuánto tiempo? Es decir, ¿van a seguir a rajatabla el criterio de los del cumplimiento de los requisitos durante los 36 meses anteriores a la renovación, o es válido tomar en consideración 34 o 35 meses, etcétera?
Gracias. ¿Alguna otra pregunta? Sí, por aquí una más y otra más por allí. Tomamos 3 preguntas y pasamos al panel.
Buenos días y enhorabuena a todos por este magnífico encuentro. Soy Pamela Hernández, abogada en La Rioja, y mi pregunta dirigida para nuestro director general, Santiago. Mi pregunta es la siguiente. En Estados Unidos, debido por la actual situación, tenemos muchas personas venezolanas que no pueden renovar sus pasaportes. En este sentido, sin embargo, el Estado español sí permite que podamos solicitar para ellos diferentes trámites de extranjería con pasaporte vencido hoy por hoy. Sin embargo, cuando obtengan el visado, se encuentran con este pasaporte vencido en Estados Unidos. Bajo su criterio, ¿cuál sería la mejor opción para que estas personas pudieran entrar en España, dado que España no va a permitir que puedan ingresar con el pasaporte vencido? Gracias.
Gracias. Y hay una pregunta más ahí, una tercera. Ana.
Hay una pregunta que quiero hacer a todos, que es la cuestión de los impuestos, ¿no? Que no aparece de manera más contundente y esto, ¿no? Facilidades, no facilidades. Y esto va a depender también de las formas en que se entiende el aporte de esas presencias en los países de anfitriones y de destino, ¿no? O sea, una pregunta sobre el vínculo entre impuestos, y eso liga a otra cuestión que tampoco aparece y que me parece que podría ser interesante, si son free movers o son free riders en el sentido político también, que es todas las lógicas. Estamos también experimentando, o sea, nómades digitales o personas que no tienen residencia fija tampoco permiten complementar de alguna manera lógicas muy importantes para los procesos comunitarios, que empiezan con los impuestos pero siguen con otras formas de participación. Entonces me pregunto también sobre los efectos políticos de poner mucha atención o mucha plata para personas realmente en movimiento, cómo se garantiza el transnacionalismo político, la consolidación del proceso democrático y de consultas, ¿no? O sea, también creo que hay una cuestión ahí interesante para pensar.
On the issue of taxes, actually, whenever there is not a double treaty on avoiding double taxation, actually the digital nomad or the person is going to be paying taxes in 2 countries. So that's quite interesting. Santiago.
Bien. Voy a intentar abordar las 3 preguntas que se han formulado. Ya se ha puesto de manifiesto por los 2 compañeros de mesa las dificultades que hay en materia de seguridad social y en materia de impuestos, ¿no? Y efectivamente yo creo que esa es una cuestión que debería tener, por lo menos en Europa, un planteamiento mucho más cerrado por parte de los Estados miembros de la Unión Europea, ¿no? En ese sentido, bueno, pues esa diversidad, antes de responder a su pregunta concreta, en ese sentido esa diversidad, pues bueno, puede hacer también más atractivo a un país que a otro a la hora de que el teletrabajador o el nómada digital decida elegir un país u otro, ¿no? Ocurre lo mismo con la seguridad social, como ocurre lo mismo también con los diferentes sistemas tributarios que hay en los países de la Unión Europea. Antes de abordar las dos preguntas que me han formulado directas, me parece súper interesante la última parte de su reflexión, ¿no?, acerca de las eventuales repercusiones políticas que pueda tener la figura del nómada digital, pero yo creo que están mucho más cualificados que yo las personas que me acompañan como miembros de la academia para intentar responderla, ¿no? Yo puedo tener mi opinión personal, pero no deja de ser mi humilde opinión personal. En cuanto a la valoración que se vaya a hacer en temas de seguridad social, como usted ha planteado, ¿no? En este momento no hay ningún criterio nuevo que hayamos aplicado, ¿no? Entonces, creo que ahí, desgraciadamente, no va a quedar más remedio que aplicar el ya conocido proverbio jurídico de dura lex sed lex, ¿no? Y en ese sentido, el que personas que hayan dicho que iban a darse de alta en seguridad social, que no hayan podido, no entro en las razones que pueda haber detrás, y que no hayan podido acreditar ese periodo de cotización ante la seguridad social, pues evidentemente en principio están incumpliendo uno de los requisitos que deben tener para poder seguir de alta en seguridad social. Eso es lo que le puedo decir hasta este momento. En cuanto a la pregunta que me ha formulado usted, tengo que reconocer que es una pregunta bastante endiablada, tengo que decírselo, y tengo una manera muy fácil de salir de ella, también se lo digo. El control de fronteras no corresponde a la Dirección General, sino que corresponde a la Fuerza de Cuerpos de Seguridad del Estado, como ustedes bien saben, en concreto a la Policía Nacional, y al mismo tiempo a las autoridades consulares a la hora de expedir el oportuno visado que permita llegar a España. Usted bien ha dicho, y lleva toda la razón, que efectivamente una vez que están en España sí consideramos la aportación del pasaporte caducado por parte de los ciudadanos venezolanos para que puedan realizar trámites de extranjería, ¿no? En el interregno en el que yo estuve fuera de la Dirección General hubo un momento, no sé cómo definirlo, me voy a tener de definirlo, en el que se volvió a reactivar que tuvieran que presentar pasaportes, después se volvió a reactivar la instrucción por la que no hacían falta los pasaportes que estuvieran válidos y en vigor, pero bueno, eso vamos a dejarlo ahí como una mera anécdota. Y es cierto que los ciudadanos venezolanos tienen todavía importantes dificultades para obtener un pasaporte renovado, ¿no? Pero como les decía, nosotros dentro de España sí estamos dispuestos a admitirlo. Para el cruce de fronteras me temo que van a tener importantes dificultades de carácter práctico para que se les permita el acceso a España.
Muchas gracias, Santiago. Kaisu, some concluding thoughts.
Yes, I'll just address a few of the points that I think were relevant to, from my perspective, this idea of the nomad as the freeloader and people moving freely around the world, which is, you cannot move freely around the world. I would say, as digital nomads, it's practically impossible in this world to be completely stateless and not pay taxes and not do anything like that. Almost everyone is registered somewhere. Most people, when I actually ask questions about this from true digital nomads who are completely on the move all the time. Personally, for example, I am currently tax resident both in Netherlands and Finland. I don't live in either one of those countries, but you have to have it somewhere, right? It feels unfair to me to pay taxes to countries that I hardly even visit. Yet I go to Thailand for 3 months and I don't pay a penny tax there. It's wrong. And when I ask people about this, they say the just system would actually be that on the border, on the way out, they were asked, how long were you here? Okay, 90 days, you pay taxes for 90 days. And then you pay where you are. This is a utopian future, but this, of course, as global citizens, this is the way you should go. But in practicality, it's impossible. From the policy perspective, when I talk about the different types, I don't actually advocate for countries to attract true digital nomads. I have a hard time trying to justify the reasoning why it would be good for countries to have these nomads who will go, who only come for a certain time and then go again. Apart from the actual just the income that they provide, but so do tourists. And we've seen so many quite bad examples. If we think of a lot of places in Spain, also Lisbon in Portugal, Madeira, where there is a large quantity of nomads on top of a huge group of a huge amount of tourists, and this equation doesn't work out. So I think for countries that if they want to bypass the freeloader nomad part, they must have policies that actually integrate them. Whereas most of the digital nomad visas now, they ask you a lot to apply for them, to get them, and a lot of duties, and you have to stay in the country, you have to get this apartment, you have to do this, but they give you hardly any rights. Most of the countries don't give you any rights to any kind of healthcare, national social security. They don't give you a right to stay in the country after. They didn't even give you a right to apply for another type of visa. They actually make you leave. I was just talking in a Balkan policy event last week, and I was reviewing out of the 10 countries present, there was 8 visas, and only one of them allowed for any kind of continuation of staying in the country. They're rather all designed exactly so that you can stay the maximum amount, but you will never get residency, will never get right to apply for residency. So it puts people actually in a precarious situation in a way. And a lot of research also shows that a lot of nomads do come from precarious working situations and, let's say, global cities that are super expensive where they can't afford to live, and then unfortunately, now they go to Lisbon with the American wage and cause the same problem there. So there's a lot of issues at stake here. But yet, I would say the image of the freeloader, or image of even being free as a nomad to move as you want, is false, because this world is governed by structures and borders and rules and stuff that still apply to even people who are nomadic.
Thank you, Kaisu. Last 2 minutes for you, Alberto. Actually, the idea of irregular migrants who are digital nomads is something we haven't mentioned, but the last 2 minutes are yours, Alberto.
Yeah, I'll be brief, as we can all enjoy a coffee break, maybe. We go straight. Okay, no coffee break then. Sorry for bringing the bad news. Just to say, as a complementary viewpoint, that I was asking myself the same question about the community level, still from a policy perspective. And so if you take tax regimes, these are not very much connected to that question, right? Which is interesting. It's more framed from maybe a utilitaristic perspective. What kind of breaks can we give? What kind of incentives can we have through taxation to entice more digital nomads to come? But then the return for the community is not very much in the picture. And so there are 3 things that come to mind that I think indicate strongly this. The first is language. Language is always the main issue when we talk about labor migration, both as an instrument but also as an obstacle. Where does language feature in all of these? You can assume that if a person is staying temporarily, they will have 0 incentive to learn the language, but that has implications in the way in which they can interact with the community. The second one is on the level of policy-making processes themselves. Are local communities somehow consulted when developing these policies? I can tell you about the European level. I would never speculate about the Spanish case. But I can tell you that the local level is not exactly the focal point when new policies are devised. And the third point is whether those taxes can actually benefit the communities themselves. What kind of projects can you actually promote thanks to these additional levies which are collected by the state? I think these are 3 important questions that are not yet into the debate.
Thank you very much, Alberto. So let me just thank the speakers again, and we conclude this panel, and we are moving to the next one with no pause, but we just continue. Thank you so much. That was absolutely excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hola. Sí. Bueno, bienvenidos todos a esta segunda parte del evento sobre nomadismo digital. Yo soy la coordinadora de la Cátedra de Migraciones y Derechos Humanos de la Universidad y soy también profesora en este centro. Estamos muy agradecidos con los ponentes. Este tema tiene que empezar a formar parte de la agenda de una cátedra de migraciones como la nuestra, aunque a veces se estudia por separado de la migración que tiene un carácter más forzado o que viene en situaciones más precarias, es importante que también forme parte, si bien las implicaciones y los perfiles y también las relaciones sociales que suscita son un poco distintas, aunque como ya hemos visto, gracias a los panelistas anteriores, también esta es una oportunidad para deconstruir lo que nosotros tenemos en el imaginario de lo que es un nómada digital. Y bueno, sin más dilación, quería presentar a los panelistas. Okay, I'm gonna switch to English because our panel now is going to be fully in English. So first, we will have Ali Green, who is a digital nomad herself. She is co-author of Remote Works, Managing for Freedom, Flexibility and Focus. Then we will have Laura Madrid, who is the head of the Global Intelligence Department of Global Citizen Solutions. And then finally, to close the event, we will have Patricia Casaburi, who is the CEO of Global Citizen Solutions. First, we will have Ali and Laura. I will make some questions to them, and then we will move to Patricia, so she will close the event. Ali, please. She has a presentation.
I can use this, but I can also be quite loud, so we'll see how it goes with the microphone. I love talking about this conversation after the first panel because if you think back to the funnel that Kaizu introduced and starting as a tourist, moving to a workationer, digital nomad and remote work resident, the driving point of having an experience in a country to begin with is why would I show up there? Of all of these places that digital nomads have the opportunity and the privilege to visit, why Spain, why Portugal, even to begin with? And over the past few years, we've been told the reason why people show up to begin with, yes, there's, good weather, there's great food, but people come and return because they find a sense of belonging in a place that's not originally where they're from. And emotionally, that's quite special. But however, I think that is now overdone to the point where we should say that not all community is created equal. And so in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to introduce some methodologies of how to think about community and what might exist, whether you're a country trying to attract nomads, a single operator hoping to build more of a sense of community, or an aspiring nomad or current nomad yourself. I like to start off usually my talks with a quick game. Since this is a very short talk, we're not going to play, but I'm going to teach it to you so you can do it on your own time, which is just to think of yourself and these questions and what you would prefer. Is something overrated or underrated? So you might choose to find yourself working remotely from rural France, from a place like Lisbon, or even a small mountain town in Bulgaria, which is the largest event for nomads every summer with 500 attendees, I believe. So maybe you're looking at this list and one place really is like the best place you could ever go, or another place you would not want to find yourself located there. And that's because individual preferences do matter when it comes to thinking about what you seek in a community, a place to visit, or a second nation to call your home. And I would just like to say that at this point, I'm a little bit fed up personally because I keep getting marketed to by places promoting a sense of community. While I was preparing this talk, even a friend of mine who is not a digital nomad, who does not work remotely and does not travel around the world, claimed in an Instagram post that community was one of the most overhyped words of 2025, and I have to agree with my friend. I think using community as a way to attract digital nomads is one of the most misunderstood ways to get remote workers to be interested in a place and to stay in a place. And frankly, it's setting a lot of people up for disappointment. And that's because, similar to the debates and conversations around what a digital nomad is, the definition of community and having shared vocabulary is extremely important. And so when I think of this, and here's just a slide that didn't transfer very well, but just a little bit about the background of where this research came from. And when I think of all of the findings I have had when it comes to talking about community, I really like to shift the conversation that work is an experience and something you can experience from a lot of different places. And this is the taxonomy that I've developed over all the different ways that nomads can find themselves working, and a lot of them lean themselves to different forms of whether it's digital nomadism, workations, or even remote work residency. So you see things like having access to co-working spaces, which might be deeply rooted in one physical location, to things like co-living pop-ups, where people share accommodation and live together while working remotely for a short amount of time. And so these are important to know just in terms of what are all of the ways that you can cater to a digital nomad audience to spend time as a tourist and even further as a remote work resident moving forward. Not to dwell on this dynamic, because I could talk another 10 minutes about this picture alone, but the important takeaway here is that when you think about designing an offer, and an offer could be a business such as a co-living community itself, an offer could be a digital nomad visa, consider the ecosystem that currently exists in your country, in your town, in your area, and what the desired state is. And I think when you think about this, you'll be able to develop the product that you're trying to offer for nomads in an even more nuanced way. I'm going to talk specifically about community as it relates to two values personas, and these are dimensions that both nomads and destinations need to find a fit in order for the expectations to be realized, so you don't have that disappointing experience of a community that doesn't exist. And so I'm going to talk through autonomous living versus a community-oriented living, as well as the social width versus the social depth of the location that you find yourself in. I think these two schemas are really interesting because it starts to help break down the nuance of what community does exist and why does it matter. So in terms of autonomous living, I like to call this the privacy spectrum. Even if you think of a country like Spain, where there's a lot to offer, both at the tourism standpoint, the digital nomad standpoint, and the remote working resident standpoint, the needs of who you are based on what category you fall into might differ. So on one end of the spectrum, you have someone who doesn't want to necessarily share their accommodation. They want to behave and act almost as it's their normal life. So they might choose to work at a cafe, work in a co-working space, but they still want that deep sense that we all feel of, do I belong here? Can I make friends? Can I have someone who knows me as the regular when I go out for tapas every Friday night? How do I know that this is the place where I can see myself stay and make an impact longer than just a few weeks, leading into that span of few months and potentially few years? So on one end of that privacy spectrum, we have people that maybe aren't looking for that. And so just having a regular event or a place to go is good enough for them. And I see that as something like a workation, where potentially hotels in their off season can offer amenities to someone who's coming with their own community and can stay there and work there and enjoy the benefits of the local region. Maybe they're not seeking more. And then the complete other end of that spectrum, we have things like co-living, which is a great new industry that's popping up, tackling the real estate challenges, the housing challenges we heard about earlier, where there's shared accommodation, private bedrooms, but with areas to work, to eat together, and to get to know other remote workers in an international space, diving into community living, not just making friends and feeling a sense of belonging. And so that goes a lot deeper. And a country, a place, a business can see how they can operate in this spectrum one way or another based on their current needs and offerings. So when we think about things like rural development and places that are off the beaten path for most tourists, that's a great co-living opportunity to bring in more remote workers that will find solace that they're not alone and they're exploring this undiscovered territory. And we're seeing projects like that pop up all across the world. In Spain, to name a few, there's projects like that in Galicia that I'm aware of, as well as a few other places that are sort of outside the normal tourist radar. The next spectrum I want to talk about is social width versus social depth. And I will pose one audience to the question, a question to the audience rather, that think about going to a party. You personally, would you rather attend a party with 100 people, or would you rather attend a party with 10 people that you can talk to for many hours on end? Again, I'm seeing some people nod when I say 10 people. You're like, yes, that feels way more comfortable. I want that. And I saw a few smiles when I said a party of 100 people. How fun is that? Again, it's because people are different, and so you cannot communicate the sense of community the same when we're talking about different things. And this is true in digital nomad communities as well. You might have social width. This is a picture of Bansko Nomad Fest, which I mentioned earlier, which is an opportunity of a very wide community. It's a place where you can go and meet lots of people, versus the sense of depth that you might have when you're sharing a co-living space with only 12 bedrooms in a town of maybe only 100 people, and you're really getting to know what local life is like. And so again, these are important considerations when designing the experience and designing the product. What do you want to sell to digital nomads and why? And then what are the different ways that you can navigate attracting those people? And so what this might look like in reality, and here's some depth again. This is a project in a co-living in Normandy in the winter, which is not a place people normally travel, where 12 people were there together to share a writing experience that I led. And so you can see how, again, it's very different than that. And why this matters is because as an operator developing a product, you can think through these different spectrums and see where you land, and then know how to communicate effectively to your target audience of digital nomads. It's no longer unique enough that some people have remote jobs and are able to travel. It's time that we start thinking more intentionally about, will this person fit this place? What does this place have to offer? What does this person have to offer? And how can we match people to create a good experience for locals, for nomads, and for businesses? And so I think starting to think of it as a product design is a really helpful way to move forward. So just some quick takeaways for locations. I think it's really important that you understand what you do and do not offer. I think back to some places I traveled and worked in the last year. Some were great for disconnecting and being in nature, but the public transportation and taxis were almost impossible to get. And so that was a place where I knew my life was going to be a lot calmer, to spending time in urban environments where I knew I was going to be out and about and engaging with the city, not just the people I was with. For operators, be intentional, and be intentional in your exclusivity as well. It's no longer needed to just try to attract all nomads. Think about what nomads specifically you're trying to attract based on what you can offer them. And for nomads themselves, anyone here who's aspiring to travel, I would say ask questions about where you're going to land and why, and then you can really feel a sense of belonging and later on, hopefully, contribution to the place you're going. And so when I think about community and why it's important, I think it's to help people understand their individual true north, so that places, people, and experience can all align with shared values moving forward. So, thank you. I don't know if that was 10 minutes, but I'm happy to answer more questions.
Fine. Laura. Laura.
Thank you. Let me just see. Okay. Other direction. Oh, sorry, guys. Okay. Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank you, Nebrija University, and Nieves and Professor Diego for hosting us in this event. I want to thank you all the speakers that accepted the invitation to be here today, Kaisu, Ali, and Alberto. So I'm Laura. I'm the lead researcher at Global Citizen Solutions. We are a global mobility firm. And every year we put together a report on digital nomadism visas and frameworks. Then again, this is okay. So what I'm going to do here today is speak a little bit about the context of digital nomadism in 2025. Then I'm going to try to interact with other people, presenters, ideas and presentations about the definition of digital nomadism and what people think about digital nomadism. And in the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about the methodology we use to put together this report and the takeaways. And in the end, we are going to explain the rankings and the sub-indexes that we have in our report. So starting with the context, as Kaizu mentioned previously, remote work is previous to what people call digital nomadism. We are just discussing in the patio that other countries had already put together legislation that would allow freelancers to work from one country and live in another country. We are mentioning that France, Germany, and the Netherlands, even before digital nomadism was a trend after the pandemic. And this brings me to the pandemic period where digital nomadism kind of exploded as a concept and as my immigration or tourism strategy for individuals, but also for countries when they implemented this kind of, let's say, mobility strategies. It started in 2020 after the pandemic with some Caribbean islands implementing digital nomad visas because they had lost revenue from tourism, and they decided to create digital nomad visas that would allow people to stay for 3 months, and if they want to stay more, they would have to leave the country and reapply for the same framework. Then other countries in the Americas started to implement their own digital nomad visas, and then Europe started to do the same. And from 2021 and 2022, you have the biggest, the most countries enacted and implemented the digital nomad visas. We still have in 2025 countries that are implementing digital nomad visas, and as Kaizu said previously, now we have 1/3 of the countries in the world that have their own digital nomad or similar arrangements, I would say. Not only digital nomad visas, but visas that allow people to stay in the country and work from clients or companies that are in other places. Let me just... We also have research that says that remote work is stable even after the pandemic. Of course, we have a surge during the pandemic years, but then after the pandemic, it remains stable. So it's not a trend. It's something that came to stay. We have no harmonized legal definition for digital nomad. It's not a concept that we can it's not similar, for instance, to a refugee definition or even migrant definition, because we don't have an international agreement or instrument that will define what is a digital nomad. We have a research that says that kind of build a profile of what is a digital nomad. We say that digital nomads are mainly people that come from tech professions. They are upper middle class, white, male, but then again, this is a self-identified digital nomads. This doesn't come from the numbers that the director of the migration department in Spain was talking when he was revealing the data of people that apply for digital nomad visa in Spain. These are people that self-identify themselves as digital nomads. but then again, there is issues related to self-definition, because we still don't understand if digital nomads are people that have to cross international borders, for instance, because we do have a lot of digital nomads that they move from state to state in the US, for instance. Then again, we use Kaisu's funnel to kind of understand this phenomenon, but are digital nomads people that just travel a couple of days and work from abroad, a couple of weeks, a couple of months? And if they stay in the country a couple of years, are they digital nomads? If they are applying, they are under digital nomad visa, or they became residents? Do they become residents when they change their fiscal residence? Or when they stay more than 183 days in the country? And why these definitions are important? Because if you don't have a definition, it's very difficult to pinpoint the numbers, because people talk about 40 million digital nomads in the world, but are they self-defined as digital nomads? Because if you look at the country's numbers, the people that will granted digital nomad visas, it's much, much less. We can have, like, let's say, we have 64 countries. If you have, on average, 10,000 people as digital nomads, you can have 500,000 digital nomads and not 40 million, as some reports will say. So I'm telling you that because our report was not made for like defining digital nomad or even like revealing how many digital nomads are in the world. What we did in our report is mapping the 64 legislations that will offer digital nomad visas or similar arrangements. We analyzed the motivations digital nomads have when they choose host country or destination country, and we crossed this information to try to identify what is the best visa for digital nomads in 2025. We did it last year in 2024, and we did it again in 2025, because every year we have a couple of countries that will implement their own digital nomad visas. We use 15 indicators. We collect data from publicly available data, and then we divided the indicators in 6 dimensions. The dimensions are the procedure, mobility and access to citizenship, tax, economics, quality of life, and tech and innovation development in the country. We used research that is available online and some insights from clients to build the report. The key findings, and I'm going to focus on procedure. There is much more information in the report here because we don't have time. I can focus on 2 specific dimensions of the index. Are the scale and profile. So we found out that 91% of the visas were created after 2020 because of the pandemic, but even before we would have in some countries legislation, some visas that would allow people to stay in the country and work remotely from that country. 79% of the nomads, they earn more than $50,000. This is based on self-defined digital nomads. So we also sometimes question this information. But we are seeing from countries that we are slowly transitioning from a period that countries would implement more tourist-like legislation for digital nomads to the situation where countries will implement more migration or semi-migration frameworks for digital nomads, wanting to not just to attract talent, but keep the talent in the country. And Spain is a good example because then again, Spain, for instance, permits that 20% of the revenue from the digital nomad comes from inside the country. And this is unique in the jurisdictions we researched on. So we can say that slow nomadism is rising, that people will, not only individuals, they want to stay and integrate in the destination countries, and we see more and more family digital nomadism as well. So digital nomads now, they are portrayed as white male soul men that will travel around the world, but more and more families will take advantage of this framework to travel abroad. And we see that from an individual perspective to a state perspective, slow nomadism is rising. We also note a strong passport effect because, of course, people that come from countries that have stronger passports, especially countries in the global north, they have more opportunities to travel and to apply for these digital nomad visas. But then again, countries from the global south are using this strategy to be more mobile and in the future to acquire a second citizenship. We're talking about Spain, for instance. Spain has a very generous citizenship time lapse for people that come from Ibero-American countries, the Philippines and Equatorial Guinea. So if a person comes, for instance, from Brazil and stay 2 years in the country, that person can apply for citizenship, and you will acquire your European passport and be more mobile. So it's also a strategy for people that are in third countries, not only in Europe. Then when we analyze the procedures, we see that 6% of the visas will offer one year visa, and then most of them, the ones from the 66%, people will be able to renew that visa. But then, once you renew the visa, usually we have to leave the country and reapply or try to apply to another immigration pathway, like work visa or family reunification or any kind of visa that the country offers. We have visas that will offer longer horizons in the time they permit people to stay in the country. So Taiwan is 3 years, Thailand is 10 years, Colombia, Norway will allow you to stay in the country for 2 years. And we also see that a few countries will allow you to use the time you spend under a digital nomad visa to apply for permanent residency and then in the future for citizenship. And that's why I told you that there are many people that are aware of this possibility, and many people that have this, what we call like weak passports, they use the strategy to be more mobile in the world in those days. We also have to talk about taxes because, as Kaizu said, it's not the case that digital nomad, they don't pay taxes anywhere. In fact, it's difficult for most digital nomads to even like grasp where they have to pay their taxes, because of course they keep paying taxes in the country that they have the previous residency, but sometimes if you spend more than 103 days in most jurisdictions, you also become a tax resident in the destination country. So digital nomads, they do seek for countries that would offer some kind of benefit, at least in the first years that people will live in that country. And then in our index, we realized that 50% of the countries that have digital nomad visas, they have a worldwide tax system. 20% have zero tax, but for everybody, not for digital nomads only. 70% implement territorial tax systems, so you only pay taxes for the revenue you source within the country, but digital nomad individuals, their income come from outside, so they pay taxes in the country of where they have the clients or where they work to, and they don't pay taxes in the countries that they are living. We have 9% of the countries have this remittance hybrid systems, and there are some countries that will offer tax benefits for digital nomads, and we're talking about Spain, Indonesia, Ireland, Romania, and other regimes. And this is also relevant because it is one of the motivations digital nomads they say when they decide where they are going to live. We have some regional landscapes regarding the jurisdictions and the framework. So we have Europe with possibility of integration and possibility of acquiring permanent residency and citizenship, but it's somehow expensive for many digital nomads, especially the ones that are sourcing clients out of Europe from global south countries. We have the Americas. People seek, like, of course, the lifestyle, tax clarity, and benefits. But in some countries, you have issues with security. Asia, we have a strong infrastructure for digital nomads, and I have to say, in special like clusters and hubs. But it's much more selective when giving rights, right, residency and citizenship rights. We have some countries in Africa, it's affordable, but then you have infrastructure gaps. And then in Oceania, we have one example is Australia. It's very expensive, but it scores high in quality of life and other indicators that you use. This is just a snapshot. I invite you to go and look our report that's being published today in our website, Global Citizen Solution website, and to find more about digital nomadism and other topics on global mobility. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. So now I will open up for questions from the audience, and then Patricia will conclude. Does someone have questions? Alberto.
Thank you very much. I have one question that I believe could be answered by all, but feel free to come in as you want. I'm wondering how much attention there is on the question of how persons who come in with a visa that could be assimilated to a visa for digital nomads, whatever that is called technically, for them to transition to other type of residence. And I'm wondering, because of the fact that there seems to be more attention still placed on entry rather than retention. And so I think this is an interesting point for those countries that try to use these entry opportunities to then promote taking up work in the country for a longer term, from a longer term perspective. And so do you also look at this question of transition and retention? And if you do give it attention in your report, what are the European countries that fare better when it comes to this? And the second question is on definitions, because I think I only started reading about this topic recently, but I don't think that it's going to be easy to come up with a universally agreed definition of what we are discussing. And so for measuring the number of persons who either self-classify or we could classify as digital nomads, have you ever thought of using indicators instead? Because there may be bottom-up indicators that give you a sense of how many people are actually looking at these opportunities or have taken advantage of them in the past. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question? Diego?
Yeah, thank you so much. That was very interesting. I was wondering about language, right? Because language is one of the issues that leads to more grievances when you think about, I don't like the word integration, I prefer inclusion. But it's, you know, in many of the public debate, it's taken for granted that, of course, migrants or foreigners should learn the language. And very anecdotally, I think many of those who self-define themselves as digital nomads, I might be wrong, and I wonder whether there is any analysis on that, do not consider that to be an important aspect? And at the same time, I don't know if the policies in the different countries are considering that to be also an important aspect that could be promoted, in various ways through, nowadays through online courses or, I'm not talking about obligations. I'm very much against any type of obligation of language learning. But, is that part of the debate? Or is this really something where we simply consider that anyone would speak in English everywhere? Very anecdotally, the other day, listening to a podcast from The Guardian about Lisbon, in particular, there were many issues around language, around people who have lived in Lisbon for many years and do not speak any Portuguese. So, I was just wondering if that is part of your analysis or of your experience as a digital nomad, etc.
Thank you. I have two questions also that I would like to make.
Yes.
No.
No, yo quería preguntar sobre la cuestión etaria. Digamos, la cuestión sociodemográfica y etaria vinculada a estos grupos. Son muy interesantes the pictures, the age of the people that is involved in this type of categories. I think is important because, por dos razones. Uno, tiene que ver con los proyectos de vida, pero también con los momentos, ¿no? In the different times in the lifestyles people, but also I think that there is something with the ages. And another thing is the health issue that I don't know if it is important also because when you are in the reproductive time, this is something, then you have the family, then you have the health problems linked to the old people and the age. So maybe one question is how these different studies linked with the problem of the issue of the age, no?
Thank you. Any other question? No. No, my question was to you, Ali, because you are a digital nomad. What are the personal motivations for pursuing this type of life style? And also, how do you feel treated by the receiving communities? And I leave it up to you. I think we have 10 minutes more or less, so we leave 5 minutes for Patricia to conclude.
I'll start with Diego's and then Alberto's. There is no single digital nomad visa that will require language knowledge. Only if people stay in the country and want to apply for citizenship, then most countries will require a certain level of language. I don't see in the debate people talking about even like offering language courses as a complement as a digital nomad visas. I understand, and one of the indicators and one of the things people think when they move to a certain destination as digital nomads is English proficiency. Some people say that, okay, I'm going to move to this country because I know English proficiency in that country is high, and English is like the lingua franca. So I don't see, but I understand language is essential for integration. Not only for you to learn about the culture, but for the local community to accept you as one more from that local community. So that could be a good strategy from countries offering inclusion and language courses for people that want to settle or travel to the country as a digital nomad. As to your questions, the first one, well, we have two, let's say, flagship programs in Europe that will go more towards immigration strategy than tourism, that is Spain and Portugal. The countries will, they do want people to come as digital nomads, but then integrate and stay in the country. They offer a permanent residency possibility under the digital nomad visa. During the time you spend as digital nomad, you can use the time to apply for longer stays. and even citizenship in the future. But then again, you have to take language courses and other kind of courses. But then you lean more towards immigration strategy than workation strategy. And the other questions was about indicators for, it's very difficult, and I think even Kaisu can jump in this question, because we try, for instance, to ask countries the numbers of people they have accepted, they have granted digital nomad visas. It's sometimes impossible to... Including Spain. We are super happy that the director of the migration department was here, because it's difficult to know how many people were granted this kind of visas. We try other types of indicators, but if you have freedom of movement agreements, it's difficult to track, and then there are many people that self-identify themselves as digital nomads, but they overstay in the country under a tourism visa. They work while they are on holidays, and then it's really difficult to have reliable numbers. And if you don't have reliable numbers, it's difficult to assess the impact of this demographic to a region or to a country, because you can say that digital nomads are the ones to blame because the rents in Lisbon are getting higher, but then you can blame over tourism as well, and you know, rental platforms. And so we don't have data, and I think the most, let's say, sensible and responsible approach is to try to find reliable data to actually have a proper answer.
So I'm just going to go through the topics that were raised. So we have questions around retention strategies, definitions, language, age, inclusion, and diversity. And then I'll share a little bit more about my own personal desires for this lifestyle. But when I hear all these questions come up, of course, there's procedural or like visa ways of answering these questions. But for me, in how I look at digital nomadism, it comes down again to product and experience design. What is the offer that you're making available for digital nomads to come? So I have a few very interesting projects that I can share as examples to a lot of these questions as answers. So one, on the retention standpoint, I'm actually going to focus on a project based in the United States, which is a project called Tulsa Bound. The city of Tulsa in Oklahoma historically for the past couple of years has been paying remote workers to move there. So very squarely in that definition of remote work resident, but in this case, domestic to the US and state to state. And the question that came up is, what about people that aren't ready to just make a move and commit to 1 year? So more of that digital nomad demographic. How do we have them experience this place as a first taste? Would they even be interested in it? And the people that attend such an event, would they want to then stay? So that goes to the retention standpoint. And in the strategic development of this project, I had the opportunity to lead focus groups and found out that what people want is an experience. So they're not just landing in this place and not knowing what restaurants to go to, where they can co-work, how to find accommodation, so lots of challenges we talked about, and instead having a community-oriented program where they could meet other people that are also new in town, created this safety net for people to come and therefore decide if they wanted to prolong their experience or not. And I believe this program, I don't know for sure, is on its second or third rotation at this point of now saying, come test us out for 1 month. And if you like us for 1 month, come back and stay 1 year. And if you like us for 1 year, stay even longer. So I do think retention can also be built in to community-oriented projects such as pop-ups that lead to more stable residency moving forward. It doesn't just have to be from a visa perspective. Definitions as well is something I'm really interested in. So of course there's this broad digital nomad definition, and we've talked about that at length this morning. But then there's all these nuances of that ecosystem map I showed earlier in terms of what are digital nomads looking for. And the space that I spend a lot of my time thinking about is this concept of co-living. So again, that community-oriented shared accommodation and living format for digital nomads. And even in this industry, the definition really varies because you find real estate professionals coming in and using it as a marketing word and definition. Same with community. What does it mean to be community-oriented? Does it just mean there's a couple of events that happen on a regular basis, or does it go deeper than that in terms of integration? And I think indicators in those aspects work really well. And so indicators of a place being a true co-living from a digital nomad perspective are things like, do they gather weekly? Are there shared meals? Do you plan activities together? Which covers the definition of community as well. And surprisingly enough, touches a lot of the language things that has been brought up, because I do see in really innovative co-living spaces a link of using language in the local community to bring people together. And so there's a really exciting example of this in France, where there's a co-living that has events that are open to the public and are bilingual in nature. And so there's this English-French connection based off of the types of events that they're holding, as well as a different co-living also in France that did a themed month around language learning. And so it was a French language month in Normandy in January, so definitely not the tourist time of year to go there, and created a unique experience for people under that tourism umbrella to get a first taste of language learning and interacting with the local community. So again, thinking about it from a product design perspective and not a requirement opens up a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs to think about how to bridge the nomad community and the local community together. On age, I love this question as well. I just had a deep conversation about this in a Slack community that I'm involved in around digital nomadism, where someone expressed some fears about traveling and being a digital nomad because of their age. And overwhelmingly, the response in the Slack community was age only becomes a problem or becomes apparent to others if you are the one bringing it up. And so a lot of the digital nomad spaces that I've been in, I led a family-oriented nomad retreat in I believe it was 2021, and the youngest participant was a toddler, and the oldest participant was a guy in his 70s, and we had people in all of the ages in between. And so I do think you're finding age-inclusive spaces pop up, as well as niche communities focusing on different phases of life. And so communities exist. A great example is a company called Boundless Life that offers community for digital nomad families with education services included, to really be able to offer products that are available regardless of the phase of life you're in. And for my personal desires, I think it goes to that point of every phase of life that I've been in, I've traveled for two reasons as a digital nomad. So the first reason is I think travel and experiencing new cultures is the best form of education that exists. And so for me, my motivation was, how do I see the world in a way where I'm being in the face of daily life challenges? Where do I go grocery shopping? How do I navigate the local language? How do I take the metro? How do I do all of this and show up successfully in my job and make friends and have fun? That's like, for someone, can be very overstimulating, but in a way that brought me like great drive to be a digital nomad, and there was a problem-solving aspect to it. And then going back to my presentation, the second reason that like being a digital nomad and this lifestyle is important to me is because I never felt the sense of belonging in the country of my origin. And I tried living in lots of different states and lots of different cities, and it just didn't feel right. But what feels right to me in terms of belonging is meeting other people that have this international mindset, that want to explore the world in a similar way. And I found belonging and community in them in this digital nomad space. So that for me was my driving factor.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. So now Patricia Casaburi, who will close the event.
Wow, thank you so much. I'm going to jump here. I have a cheat sheet, but I'm just going to pick up on what Ali was saying, and then I'll circle back to all the thanks and the formalities. We've developed Global Citizen Solutions a term called citizenshipness, which is all about moving away a little bit from community, but is the sense of belonging. So we can debate that over lunch maybe today. Anyways, just echoing what Laura already said, thank you so much for Nebrija University for having us, for filming and helping this event and this very positive discussion to reach like a broader audience. Hopefully, you know, we'll have collaboration and comments, because we do thrive from listening to how people feel and policymakers can enhance their programs. Thank you so much, Diego Acosta, for coordinating this event so beautifully and putting together this amazing panel of speakers who've been sharing their expertise as well as unique perspectives. So we had Professor Kaizu from the Radboud University, and she brought her very enriching research, academic research, and also her personal experience when it comes to understanding the migration dynamics. That was extremely positive. Then we had Santiago Yerga from the Spain's General Directorate of Migration Management. He actually proved he came up with incredible insight, especially when it comes to data, which is super rare to get access to, so I was particularly happy about that. But also it was really interesting to understand the Spanish government perspective and how they are redesigning, and we talked about a lot today about definitions and so on, and how they are distinguishing between digital nomads and remote workers. And this was actually a bit of evolution on the original legislation, so I thought that was particularly interesting. Alberto Nihad, sorry, let's see if I butchered your name, who's the head of the European Migration and Diversity of the European Policy Center. Thank you for the analysis of the EU perspective, more problematic, of the policies that regulate or revolve around migration overall. I think there are a lot of important questions that were raised. There are definitely some countries that answer some of your questions quite well, but I think there's a lack maybe of dialogue, of integration, so I thought you suggested a way forward that seemed quite positive of, you know, maybe getting people talking in a kind of more structured EU approach. Thank you, Ali Green, who is a digital nomad and also had an amazing presentation that gives a little bit of the human aspect of what is to be a digital nomad, whatever that really actually is, but just being firsthand experiencing the best and the worst the world has to offer. And she also wrote a book called Remote Works, so if you're interested in the topic from a different perspective, not so much legislation, please, check it out. And to a dear Laura Madrid, who works relentless. She's the lead researcher at the Global Intelligence Unit. We work several papers and white papers around different topics on migration, taxation, wealth management, optimization, and everything that kind of revolves around this field, which is the global mobility area. She's super meticulous. So thank you so much for the work. Let's go. So the Global Digital Nomad Report, the intention is to analyze and present a comprehensive index. We approach this from a kind of cross-border dimension of this lifestyle, where there are vast opportunities and they don't come without challenges, as we discussed today. So navigating immigration laws, tax systems, and cultural adaptation. And then to Diego's point as well, what we see in Portugal, we are a victim of the Portuguese speaking English so well. Is a challenge for a lot of our residents that really try to learn the language and they're studying, but the moment you speak Portuguese, they'll reply to you in English. So that's a challenging reverse, if it is such a thing. So I'm nearly there, I promise. At Global Citizen Solutions, we hope to have this report as a tool and as also as an inspiration for guiding digital nomads to make informed decisions about where to live and work, but also hoping to guide or assist or be part of the conversation with policymakers to design smarter regulations that serve their locals and the countries as well as the guests or the digital nomads. But also to encourage communities, you know, to frame the conversation in a positive way, what it is that digital nomads or migration brings to host countries. So hopefully this will just, you know, spark conversations later on in the little groups and maybe more broadly about the future work of mobility and global citizenship. So we are seeing countries that are adopting strategies to attract talent and investment, creating benefits, and it's my personal belief that immigration is beneficial. Like anything, you know, there's always questions to be addressed, but it's definitely the human capital and economic benefits are definitely worth pursuing, perfecting, discussing, taking local communities into account as well is super important for the success of it, for avoid any backlash was something that we kind of, I think, touched here as well. So, well, thanks again. For those that are joining us online or would like to watch at a later stage, this video will be posted on YouTube and our own website as well. Thank you again for the university and everyone here for your time and important questions. And, well, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. We close it.